Hey folks, welcome back to the channel, your home for all content Lord of the Rings home. Today, I want to start doing a series of videos that are basically more in-depth guides for each particular chapter of the raid. Basically what these videos are geared towards, or the viewers that these videos are geared towards, are people who are maybe just starting to play the game, just starting to get into raids with their guild. So if you are somebody who's been in raids for a while now, this is probably not the video for you, but basically the structure here is going to be, we're going to go through the basic mechanics, what you should be trying to do in each chapter of the raid to maximize your points. We're going to go through characters that are good in that particular chapter of the raid and teams that are very good in that particular chapter of the raid. And then we'll talk about some difficulty tuning, and then we'll show some footage and go through certain scenarios. We'll obviously talk about like first turn setups and that sort of thing as well. So kind of starting from the basic premise of like what you should be trying to do, and then how and you're going to achieve that character-wise, that sort of thing, right? So let's just get into it for chapter 1 of the raid. First, we'll go over the scoring. Basically, you gain 5 points for every percentage of health lost by an enemy orc. You gain 500 points for every defeated enemy orc. Whenever 2 or more enemy orcs are defeated in a single turn, gain 2,500 points for every orc defeated this way. And then gain 2,500 points for every enemy orc defeated by an enemy Moria bomber. So, just from reading that, it should be pretty clear that the way you score maximum points in Chapter 1 of the Mines of Moria raid is to get the bomber to drop the bomb on his side and kill all of the enemy orcs. And there are a number of ways to do that, meaning that, like, you can just focus all of your efforts on getting the bomber to drop his bomb, or you can bring in characters with AoE or targets the other orcs to get down to below 50% health, basically in the yellow, and then switch to the bomber to have him drop his bomb. Basically, the way it works is, let's click on the bomber. Pretty sure it's the guy with the top knot here. Yep. Basically, the way it works, right, is the bomber takes a turn. He uses his skill, where basically he goes into this don't rush me state. It's this skill right here. And this don't rush me state makes him evade all attacks, basically. It's not quite the case. Like if an attack is unavoidable, or if a character has nimble eye, you can still do damage, but pretty much avoids all the attacks. And then when you hit him, he gets a stack of this don't rush me. As soon as he gets to 5 stacks of don't rush me, he immediately drops his bomb. If the other orcs are below 50% health, he wipes them out as well. That's how you get those max points. And if there's another bomber on the field who's also in a don't rush me state, we'll talk more about the situation later, the double bomber situation, but him dropping the bomb, if it doesn't kill that bomber, it will add a stack to their don't rush me state. One thing to note is that while in the don't rush me states, the bomber is slower than he normally is by about 15% speed, so that gives you sort of an opportunity to strategize and think about what you want to do, how to optimize points for your situation, how to optimize survivability, or whether you want to get other orcs down to the yellow percentage of health, or if you just think you need to focus all in on the bomber himself. The other mechanic that is worth mentioning that is very important for Chapter 1 is basically what makes the Chapter 1 of the raid sort of escalate and eventually will end your run, right? You can't stay in Chapter 1 forever and just kind of survive as long as you can. No, there's a mechanic specifically in place to prevent that, and they're over here. It's the passive that all of the orcs get, not just the bomber, and essentially they get 10% turn meter, and I believe, yeah, it's plus 10% damage and plus 10% resistance per stack. So whenever this character uses a special ability, okay, so not when they're using a basic, but when they use a special ability, they get their over here stack, and when you kill that orc, the next one is going to spawn in with the same number of stacks that the previous orc had, plus 1 for being spawned in. One of the caveats here is that if the bomber kills that orc, then they lose a stack. So my kind of understanding is they lose their stack, but then they gain a stack from coming back in. So it's kind of a net negative or net zero situation there, which is good because they start to really ramp up damage, and then also when they come in, they could start at, 60, 70, 100% turn meter, immediately go, and it's going to ruin your day. But that's kind of the mechanic that's in place to make sure that eventually Chapter 1 sort of ends, and you're kind of fighting against that particular clock, I would say. Some of the other orcs to watch out for I would say, are these are the starting 6. They don't have it on here for some reason, but there's also another one that can spawn in called the War Guard. But basically, we can quickly go through these. Here's a Skull Crusher. He is probably your #1 target after the Bomber for making sure you get damage on him. And that is because of his special one. It applies a slow, an AoE slow for 1 turn, which is massively brutal to your team. And there's one in the starting lineup, and this is the first thing he's going to do, is apply slow to your team. So unless you have a way of dealing with that, your team is not going to be that effective in Chapter 1. Mangler, kind of low priority. Big thing here, though, is he gives himself haste on his basic here, which just makes him go faster. He can build up more of those. They're over here stacks, rather. But less of a priority. Shadow Seer is super important. I would say the 2 non-bomber mobs that are most important for Chapter 1 to keep an eye on and control of are the Skull Crusher and the Shadow Seer. And the reason I'm saying that for the Shadow Seer is because he can cleanse a Bane on his basic from 1 random squad member. This is super important in the first sort of setup. We'll go through that when we get there. He can also heal. He's also one of the reason that's important is because you can maybe have everybody down in the yellow, right? You're working on the bomber, about to drop the bomb, get all those max points, and then the Shadow Seer will go bring everybody back up to above the yellow, and then you're kind of hosed. So something to keep an eye on here. He's also one of the 2 orcs that can summon in more orcs. Unlike Chapter 3, where if you kill an orc, another one just immediately spawns in. Here, if you kill an orc, it doesn't automatically get filled. The Shadow Seer and the War Drummer are the 2 orcs that can summon using one of their special abilities. They come in and kind of refill the ranks, let's say. If there's not a bomber currently on the field, there's guaranteed to be at least 1 bomber coming onto the field, so that there's always at least 1 bomber when new orcs get spawned in, if that makes sense, right? So let's say you just have the bomber drop their bomb, but no other orcs are killed. When the War Drummer or the Shadow Seer summons another one in, it's guaranteed to be a bomber. That way, you always have that bomber on the field. Firestarter, pretty annoying because he can give stamina, but I think the most annoying part about him is actually that he can blind one of your characters. He also grants Eagle Eye, which makes blinds on the enemy team, on the orcs, pretty ineffective. I don't think he's that much of a problem in Chapter 1 as maybe as he is in Chapter 3. Okay, that's the bomber. And then here's the War Drummer. Again, not somebody to super worry about in Chapter 1. Definitely more of a problem in Chapter 3. But he can give him his allies' turn meter and take away your character's turn meter. But yeah, he's also one of the orcs that can summon into the slots here. So that's kind of just a brief overview of what you should be focusing on, what you should be wary of when you're going into Chapter 1 of the raids. Let's talk about difficulty and sort of tuning, I would say. Pretty much most teams are going to, most like level 60, gear tier 8, even gear tier 9 teams are going to be in difficulty 3. There are currently a few teams that are able to do difficulty 4. By a few, I guess I mean Rivendell is able to do difficulty 4. I wouldn't worry about that right now. But difficulty 3 in Chapter 1 of the Mines of Moria raid appears to be, at least to me, tuned to about 5 stars. Your character's having 5 stars. Difficulty 2 is about 2 stars, I would say, and then difficulty 1 is kind of just whatever's at the bottom of the barrel of your roster. And then obviously you want to be aiming for difficulty 3 because any amount that you would get gets multiplied by 9 and it'll show it on screen, right? And this is a really, really good way to basically having multiple teams getting difficulty 3 max points is a really good way to make sure that you get all of the Gandalf shards in your personal reward track. So aim for difficulty 3 with a team, bring them up to that sort of power. It says recommended power 55,000. I would say for Chapter 1, for most teams, most standard teams, you should try be difficulty 3 with 30k. I would say even at 28k, you should maybe give it a go, see what it's about, and then kind of come back. And if it's too much, you can kind of come back. Obviously, if you're maxing out difficulty 2, it's worth trying difficulty 3 just to see how you kind of measure up. And if you can get more than 300,000 points, obviously better to do difficulty 3. With the RNG out of Chapter 1, I would, or the significantly reduced RNG of Chapter 1, I think it's worth seeing where your teams are at and how well they can do. Okay, so that's kind of where we're at difficulty tuning wise, I would say. 5 stars, 3 stars, and then kind of bottom of the barrel. That definitely changes for the other chapters, and I would say difficulty 3 might be more tuned to 7 stars for maybe chapter 2 and 3, but definitely for chapter 1, it feels like this is a 5-star sort of setup. Let's talk about characters and teams that are good. So this is a little infographic I made just to sort of guide you on what characters you should maybe be looking at to bring into chapter 1 of the raid. One thing I want to emphasize is that pretty much most teams now, if you have enough investment in them, can do chapter 1 of the raid and get 900k points in difficulty 3 just with the right amount of investment. Okay, so you don't have to worry about totally getting a raid specific team. There's not like one team in chapter 1 that you need to have, otherwise you're basically going to lose out on performance. Obviously there are some teams that are better than others, but you shouldn't feel bad about whatever teams you have because a lot of them can work pretty well. That being said, the characters that do best in chapter 1 of the raid are the ones that can put more than one stack of Don't Rush Me on the bomber when they attack. The absolute GOAT, the king of chapter 1 for me, is Aemir. And the reason for that is because he has a summon, so you just have an extra attack that you can then put onto the bomber. But that ability also counts as 2 stacks onto the bomber, which is crazy. Plus, every turn he goes, if he's got a level 5 passive, he's giving himself the ability to assist on one of his character's next basic attacks, right? That is also another 2 stacks on the bomber. So he has a lot of tools to be able to deal with getting stacks on the bomber, and that makes him very, very effective. The other characters I've listed here also have abilities where basically people are called to assist and can put more than 1 stack on the bomber. That is very, very effective for when you run into situations where you feel like you're slowed, or you have to work around some war guards, or you want to make sure that you have some survivability. Basically, it just gives you the breathing room that you need to kind of strategize around making sure that you can get the bomber to drop on his side. Because if he takes his turn and he doesn't have 5 stacks, right, he throws the bomb at you, and you don't want to deal with that. You just don't want to deal with that. You want to avoid that pretty much at all costs. So some other characters on here are Ugluk and Mauher, and the hobbits are pretty good at this. I will note that there's currently a little bit of confusion because there are some skills where it seems like it should be a team up attack and put 2 stacks on there. For instance, Elrahir Special 2 when Eladin's in the party, or Bekaloo and Wubate, they've got a kind of team up attack or whatever, but it doesn't. It's not multi-hit attacks, it's these assist mechanic attacks, and even then there's a little bit of nuance. So I've got all the ones we know about here in this particular column, so you can take note of that. Obviously, characters with AoEs are also pretty important here. Ironhide is really, really good in chapter 1. I didn't put that there because I think most people can recognize when they see, AoEs and that sort of thing. Healers and cleansers are in the right-hand side here, and there's kind of a theme for the Mines of Moria raid, and that's you need survivability and you need cleanses. And so that's kind of why I've included it here. There are certain characters that you want to have to kind of defeat the certain mechanics of that particular raid chapter, but I would say as a theme for the Mines of Moria raid, you want some sort of healer, you want some sort of cleanser fitting into some of your teams. So I've got those here in this right-hand column, all the characters that can do that. Okay, let's talk about meta teams. Currently, the best Chapter 1 team, and I would say even just the best raid team overall right now, are the Rivendell Elves. And currently, the Rivendell Elves are basically the only team that can max out difficulty 4, which is crazy. But they're just a very, very good raid team. They work really well together. You should be working on getting Elrond if you can, right? We don't know when he's coming back, probably sometime, definitely before the end of the year, but my guess is sometime in October. If you can, you should be working on getting 5 5-star elves so you can at least unlock Elrond and get that team up and running. It'll massively, massively boost your raid performance. Another meta team is Road to Rivendell. The hobbits have a lot of tools to deal with the bomber. They're a little bit low on survivability, and they also require a decent amount of investment because their skills aren't 100% assist mechanics, right? They're percentage based, and you want to guarantee those assist mechanics, which requires upgrading those skills. But once you do, R2R team comes online, and they can very, very easily deal with Chapter 1. Pretty good raid team. I think the Rohan 3 are really, really good, flexible raid team. Rohan 3 are also obviously a light side squad that they kind of push you towards in the beginning of the game, so definitely worth investing in because they have a lot of utility in the raids, and it's just sort of a core 3, right? You have the Rohan 3, Eowyn, Eothane, Eomer. In Chapter 1, they're basically carried by Eomer, but Eowyn also does have a cleanse. It's pretty good. They've also got turn meter manipulation sort of stuff going on. You can slot in any 2 people with the Rohan 3. I know a lot of people use Ironhide for that extra AoE. I use Halbarad and Strider, again, for the AoE and a little bit of sustain, right? So you can kind of pick and choose one of these plug-and-play characters, or any of these characters from up here, put it in with the Rohan 3 team, and you've got yourself a very, very solid Chapter 1 raid team. Haradrim, also very good raid team, just kind of overall in all 3 chapters, but again, like R2R, requires significant investment. The reason for that is because of the leadership ability of T-Beb. Basically, they share passives amongst each other. That leads to 2 kind of consequences. 1, you need to make sure that you're maxing out their passives. Obviously, that's the most expensive skill to max out, so requires significant investment there. But 2, it makes it kind of a cookie-cutter team. You're not swapping anybody out from the Haradrim. You kind of, that's their solid unit. It's just the Haradrim team, right? There's no theory crafting going on in that particular case, and at least in terms of team composition. And then the last team I want to talk about that's a meta team, not just for Chapter 1, but definitely in Chapter 1, are the Goblins. They're very fast, they have a lot of AoE, and they have a summon. So they have this ability to kind of get everybody down where they need them in terms of Orc HP, and then really focus in on the bomber, get them to drop the bomb, and score maximum points that way, in a way that doesn't allow the stacks of they're over here to build up and basically wipe out the Goblins, because survivability on the Goblins is an issue, basically how tanky they are. Let's talk a little bit about what you should expect the first turn you go into the Chapter 1 Mines of Moria raid. Basically, there are 6 characters, orcs, that summon in, right? And they are actually the first 6 on this particular list here, right? And these are in speed order. So the first person that goes is the Shadow Seer, and then the Mangler, the Firestarter, the Skull Crusher, the Bomber, and then the War Drummer. Why is this important? Well, let's say you have somebody who can apply a blind, like Ugluk, right? You want to blind the Skull Crusher because you don't want the Skull Crusher to do an AoE slow and basically slow down all of your orcs. Speaking of which, I should briefly mention the reason Isengard are not on the top meta teams is because they don't really have a good way of dealing with the slows. They don't have a good way of dealing with the cleansers. So if you want to swap somebody out on the Isengard team for somebody else, I know people basically use the Isengard 3, maybe a cleanser plus Ironhide. It really depends on your roster, but these are the things you got to think about. All right, back to it. So you blind the Skull Crusher, right? The Shadow Seer is going to go then, and he has the ability to cleanse a Bane from the Skull Crusher with his basic, which he will do, and then the Skull Crusher will hit you with the AoE slow anyway. So that's why we're talking about this sort of first turn setup. There are ways, of course, to get around that. So for instance, if you use Beklu with Isengard, something I really like to do, although it doesn't seem to be very popular just because most people who have Beklu have all the Haradrim, but you can apply a poison to this Skull Crusher and the blind to the Skull Crusher. The Shadow Seer can only cleanse one of them. So if you get lucky, cleanses the poison, then you get the blind still stuck on the Skull Crusher, then you don't get slowed down. That's important. The other reason is that the Skull Crusher is going to go apply an AoE slow, and then immediately, right after that, the Bomber is going to go into the don't rush me state. So you're going to get slowed, and then you immediately have to deal with the Bomber. And that is why we're talking about this first turn setup, because that is the puzzle your team has to be able to initially solve. And if it can't do that, it's not going to be good at Chapter 1. If it has tools to deal with that, or you get lucky, then you'll be fine in Chapter 1, right? Let's go through some footage. Here I have using the Rohan 3. I use Halbarad and Strider with them. let's go through that. This is difficulty 3. It's a 35k team, so definitely should be doing pretty well in chapter 1 of the raid, getting close to 900k points or getting 900k points. We're going to talk about some specific setups, what's happening, because there's a lot of situations that happen in this particular run that I want to talk about. I go for the Skull Crusher first, usually. If I can, I would love to kill him before he can do his AoE slow, but I can't do that there. Obviously, I don't have enough damage, so everybody on my team is basically slowed except for Strider. Not good, because now we're in Don't Rush Me. This is why Aemir is so important, right? He gets a summon, and he's able to apply 2 stacks. The Bomber starts at 1 stack. You need to get to 5, which effectively means you just need 4. Boom. That's the first Bomber out, and we took out the Skull Crusher. Then the Shadow Seer summoned in 2 more Orcs. One of them is guaranteed to be a Bomber. In this case, we got 2. 2 Bomber situations are something I want to talk about because you kind of have a few options. You can either prevent one Bomber from going into the Don't Rush Me state, which is a special skill. So if you put a disable or an ability block on the Bomber, then they can't go into the Don't Rush Me state. That's important to note. And 2, if they both get into the Don't Rush Me state, right, and one Bomber drops the bomb, it counts as a stack on the other Bomber. So instead of needing 4 total stacks on Don't Rush Me to add to the Bomber, you only end up needing 3. But of course, if you get the Bomber down to below 50% health, and then another Bomber drops their bomb, they're going to get wiped out too, even if they're already in the Don't Rush Me state. This is why AoEs are important. Get everybody down into the yellow. So now I'm going to basically put the disable on that for other Bomber, and then my whole goal here is, okay, this is sort of what my thinking is. If the Shadow Seer is going to end up going, either by healing or by doing a basic and cleansing this disable, I want to make sure that I'm ready. So that's kind of why I'm continuing to put damage into that Bomber. So the Shadow Seer healed. You can see that that's now going to be an issue. Now we've got Don't Rush Me on that first Bomber. But everybody's above yellow. And that's a problem. And this is where AoEs become important. Get the AoE from Ethane, comes in, puts everybody back below yellow. Boom, finish him off with Halberad. And we go up to what? After 2 bombs, we go up to 437k points. And the first bomb didn't take anybody out except the Skull Crusher and the Bomber. Now we've got an interesting situation where we've got 2 War Guards, a Shadow Seer, and a Bomber that have come in. You can work around the War Guards. They only have Provoke. It is not an instant restart if you've got War Guards on the field here. But you do need to be in a good situation where you can deal with these Provokes and still get your stacks on there, right? This is kind of where the strategy comes into play. And to be honest, it's Aemir who is doing a lot of the heavy lifting here. We get the Shadow Seer out. We've got 2 War Drummers, so we don't have to worry about that. Skull Crusher, that's a big issue. Try to put a disable on him. That way he isn't able to use his slow. Again, AoE, just to make sure that I'm able to get everybody down with this next Bomber attack. Here's an interesting situation that I want to take some time to talk about, because this is going to come up while you are doing these runs. Okay, I am down. Ethane got killed. I am down a character. Halberad's in rough shape right now, right? So I have an option. I can either heal or I can put a stack on the Bomber. If it's looking to be about 50-50, if I look at my team and I go, I don't know if I'm going to be able to get all the stacks on there in time, I think, personally, you should lean towards putting stacks on the Bomber. That's what I'm going to end up doing here, and it pays off for me. But if you choose to heal here, and you don't get 5 stacks, then the heal is basically going to be wiped out by the fact that you're getting a bomb thrown in your face, right? That's just putting might on people because I have some counterattack. And again, Aemir getting his summon out is massive. Now I'm at 870k points, right? But let's look at this lineup. We got a War Guard, we got 2 Skull Crushers, and we got a Bomber. And these Skull Crushers came in, not with the... We're doing okay because they came in with not a lot of turn meter, once their over here stacks get to 10 and they get kind of reset, so it's not constantly coming in with 100% turn meter, that would be pretty unfair, I think. Now we got to deal with a War Guard. Get the heal off. That's worth it in that particular case because we don't have the Don't Rush Me on the Bomber yet. And now we've had two Skull Crushers apply slow to everybody, right? Halberad's out. So now I'm down to 3 characters, and all of my characters are slowed, and I only need 30k more points to be able to do any sort of thing. And I get lucky here because Aemir ends up going. Again, the MVP of Chapter 1, in my opinion. This doesn't even take out anybody else, but just kills that particular bomber, get to max points here. Obviously you submit, right? So that's just kind of a playthrough of a team that I think a lot of people are going to have leveled up, and a very good team for Chapter 1. And I think it showcases a lot of the different scenarios that you might come across and where you have to make decisions and how to optimize for that. Obviously, this isn't like a step-by-step guide on how to always make sure that you get to 900k points. Some of it's going to be you having to figure out the situation. And that's where the fun comes in, at least, you know, when I'm playing this game, figuring out what to do in particular situations, strategizing, all that sort of thing. I'm just hoping to give you some tips and building blocks and sort of a guided light path on how to get you to maximum points. Because the more points you get in the raid, right, the more rewards you're going to get, especially on the personal track, which you can get every chapter, and the more your account is going to progress. But that's all for me for Chapter 1 of the raid. I may or may not post that infographic on my Discord. If I do, it may be after I finish releasing the Chapter 3 one of the raid. We'll see what I want to do there. Thanks for watching, and take it easy.